Hello students, myself Dr. Avinash Patil, Assistant Professor, Department of Accountancy, JA College of Commerce, Sangli. This video is prepared for BCom second year, semester 3. Subject is Corporate Accounting, paper number 1. So as per the revised syllabus, choice-based credit system, this video is mainly focused on issue of shares. That is the basic concepts. So before we go, what is the accounting procedures, how to prepare the journal entries on the issue of shares. Every student should know what is the shares, types of the shares, calls on shares, issue of the shares at par, at premium, at discount, calls in arrears, calls in advance, what is pro rata allotment, forfeiture of shares, the reissue of the forfeitures. So we should know what is the meaning, what is this, and then after we can focus what is the accounting procedure, what is the journal entry, how to prepare the journal entries. So this is the important part of our syllabus. So we are going to in detail about the basic concepts regarding the issue of shares. We'll just start. First of all, we should know, as we know that every company requires a huge capital, and such capital can be raised to the different sources. So what are the sources for the funding? What are the sources for getting the funds for the capital, for the company? So there are the different sources. All these sources can be divided into the owned capital, borrowed capital. So as per this slide, you are noticing there are the three concepts: retained earnings, debenture capital, equity capital. So these are the sources. First, the retained earnings. In brief, we are going to discuss that what is the retained earning. Retained earning nothing but the profit kept aside by the company, the previous profits. Whenever the company earns the profit, some portion of the profits are kept aside. It may be used for the future losses, it may be used for issuing the bonus shares. It is nothing but the savings of the company. The particular percentage, rate of percentage, the retained earnings are kept aside on the profit, and it can be used for the future requirements. So definitely, or of course, it comes under the owned capital, retained earning. This is one of the source of the capital. Debenture capital, it comes under the borrowed capital. Company can raise the capital, company can raise the borrowed capital by issuing the debentures. In this lecture, we are not going to discuss in detail about the debenture capital, but in short, we can say this is the borrowed capital. Company issues the debenture. The company has to pay the fixed rate of interest to the debenture holders. You can issue the debenture for the specific period of time. So after the completion of time, you have to refund their capital. But there are some types also in the debentures, such as redeemable debenture, irredeemable debenture. Redeemable debentures mean you have to refund their capital after a specific period of time, 5 years, 6 years, whatever may be. Irredeemable means you can use this fund up to lifetime of the company. You can refund at the time of the liquidation of the company. This is the irredeemable fund, irredeemable debenture capital. Registered debenture, not registered debentures, it is also one of the type of the debenture. Then convertible debenture, non-convertible debentures. Convertible debenture means after the period of time the debentures are converted into equity shares. Non-convertible means definitely it cannot be converted into the equity shares. After the completion of time, their funds will be refunded. So this is the one of the source, debenture capital. Another is the equity capital. This is the most popular source. Majority of the company earns the capital or get the capital by issuing the equity shares. Majority funds are obtained by issuing the equity shares. First of all, we should know what are the types of the shares. There are two types of the shares, the preference shares and equity shares. Most popular, just I told that equity shares, issuing the equity shares is the most popular method. So these are the types of shares: equity share, preference shares. Just first I will tell what is the preference shares and the different preference shares. What are the different preference shares, types of different shares? So preference shares, we can define what is the preference share. Preference shares means they have a preference in the two cases: getting the dividend at fixed rate, and they have preference to getting their capital at the liquidation of the fund. They have preference before the equity shareholders. So this is the word used, preference shares. Preference shareholders get the fixed rate of dividend, and they get the dividend before the payment of the dividend to the equity shareholders. And also they also get their capital, their capital before the refund of the equity shareholders at the time of the liquidation. But one thing is that they haven't right to vote or to attend the annual general meeting. They have limited rights of the voting. Voting in the case regarding their influencing matter. So these are the types of the preference shares. First is the cumulative preference shares and non-cumulative preference shares. So what is the cumulative preference shares? Cumulative preference shares, here they have right to receive the arrears of the dividend of the previous year. Sometimes the company could not earn the profit, so they can't pay the dividend. But the next year, the preference shareholder, such type of the preference shareholders, cumulative preference shareholders, can get the dividend, arrear of the dividend, in which they haven't got their dividend. And non-cumulative, these shareholders are not entitled to get the arrears of the dividend. They get yearly dividend only if the company makes the sufficient profit. Another type is participating and non-participating preference shares. Participating means, look at that, preference shareholders get the fixed dividend. But if the company get or receives or earns the extraordinary profit, then after the payment of dividend to the equity shareholders, they get the share of surplus profit along with their fixed dividend. So such type facility are getting to the participating preference shares. And non-participating means they will get only the fixed dividend which they get year to year. They haven't right to get the dividend on the surplus profit. There will not extra dividend for such type of the preference shareholders. Redeemable preference shares and non-redeemable preference shares. Redeemable preference shares means they are issued for a specific period of time. Means after the completion of specific period, that is 5 years, 4 years, then the company has to refund their capital. Redeemable preference shares. And what is the non-redeemable? That company can use their capital up to the lifetime of the company, but they have to refund at the time of the liquidation of the company. There is no any specific period. And last, the convertible and non-convertible. Convertible preference shares are converted into the equity share after the specific period of time. And non-convertibles, such type of the preference shares are not converted into the equity shares. This is called as a non-convertible preference shares. So these are the types of the preference shares. Now we are discussing about what is the equity shares. In simple word, equity shares means according to the Company Act 1956, Section 85(2), the shares which are not preference shares are the equity shares, in very simple words. In very simple words. Such shares are also called as ordinary shares. Such shares are also called as the risk shares. The dividends depends upon the profit earned by the company. If there is high profit, high dividend. If there is less profit, low dividend. And if there is no profit, I am repeating, if there is no profit, such shareholders, equity shareholders, do not get their dividend. So purely depend upon the profit. And one important point is that their investments, equity shareholders investment, their capitals are refunded after the payment of all the liabilities, after the payment of the preference shareholders capital, and if the fund or capital remains balanced, then only the equity shareholders get their capital. It means they have a last preference. So that is why such shareholders are called as risky shares. They take the risk because they are the true owners, first of all. But also they have a voting rights in annual general meeting because they are the true owners. Equity shareholders are the true owners of the company. Equity share capital also called as a venture capital, but we should keep in mind that equity shares are the most popular than the preference shares. And just I told that majority of the capitals company raise by issuing the equity shares. So these are the types of the equity shares. Next, from the above discussion, you might have clear that what is the difference between the preference shares and equity shares. These are the difference in the form of table. Voting rights, just I told that the equity shareholders do not have the voting rights except at their class meeting. Means if there is any influencing factors on them, then they have voting rights. But in general, they haven't right to vote or to attend the general meeting. But generally, the equity shareholders enjoy the voting rights. Payment of dividends. Equity preference shareholders have a preference to get their dividend every year. But equity shareholders get the dividend after the payment of the preference shareholders. Repayment of capital. The holders, preference shareholders have a preference, have a right to repayment of their capital. But the repayment of the equity shares capital is made after making the repayment of the preference shareholders. The dividend rate is fixed in case of preference shareholders, but the rate of dividends is flexible or purely depend upon the profit earned by the company in case of equity shareholders. Preference shares can be converted into the equity shares. Just we have discussed in convertible preference shares. After a specific period of time, such shares are converted into the equity shares. But in case of equity shares are not convertible. It means that we cannot say that equity shares are converted into the preference shares. Redemption, the preference are redeemable during the lifetime of the company, and the equity shares are not redeemable during the lifetime of the company. So this is the difference between the equity shares and preference shares, but both are the best for the company for raising the capital. Company can issue both equity shares and preference shares. Company can issue the shares in three methods. As per you are noticing, you can issue the shares at par, company can issue the shares at a premium, and company can issue the shares at a discount. At par, at premium, at discount. So here is the meaning. The company is issuing the shares at par means the shares are issued at a price equal to the face value of the shares. Suppose the face value of the shares is ₹10 and market price or if the selling price is ₹10, then company is issuing the shares at par. Suppose the face value is 10 and company is issuing the shares at ₹10, then company is issuing the shares at par. Generally, majority of the company, maybe we can say that they issue the shares at par. Whether the company issues at a premium or issues at a discounts depend upon the demand and supply, period of prosperity, depression, political and economic conditions. So such factors are also influencing. If the company is issuing the shares at premium, it means the shares are issued at a price higher than the face value of the shares. It means if the face value is rupees 10 and if the company is issuing the shares at rupees 11, then it may be called as company is issuing the shares at a premium. Suppose the company's goodwill is very good, well established, well settled, then such type of the company can issue the shares at a premium. But some points should be keep in mind that such premium amount is not a share capital. Hence, it is not credited to the share capital account. It is a capital profit. And such amount is credited to share premium account, which is separately created. And such share premium can be used by the company only for the issuing the bonus shares or for writing of the primary expenses, etc. And another third method is the company can issue the shares at a discount. It means the shares are issued at a price lower than the face value of the shares. Same example I am taking. If the face value is rupees 10 and company issuing the shares is rupees 9, then the company is issuing the shares at a discount. But such discount should not be more than 10%. Some factors, some rules and regulations the company has to follow while issuing the shares at a discount. It is a capital loss and should be debited to the discount on issue of shares account. There are some conditions, just I told that we should be followed by the company while issuing the shares at a discount. The next slide shows that what are the steps of issue of the shares. As we know that generally entire amount of the face value is not necessary to pay for the investors. Investor can pay such face value in easy installment. Company demands in the installment method, such as first, if you are applying for the shares, then company will demand some part of the installment along with the application. Then with share allotment and with calls on share, I mean first installment, second installment and third installment, etc., etc. Here is the example you are noticing. Suppose 10,000 shares are issued, rupees 10 is the face value or a selling price, rupees 1 lakh is the capital. Here the company is demanding rupees 3 as the application money. It means while you are applying the share, you have to pay rupees 3 for every shares. It means if I applying for 10 shares, then I have to pay rupees 30 along with the application. And then second, if you are sanctioned the shares, then you have to pay the allotment money. While it means the company is demanding some money along with the allotment. This is rupees 3. And then first call rupees 10 and second call rupees 10. Total is rupees 10. The face value is rupees 10. So through this easy installment, investor can pay the money to the company. And generally prospects gives the date about how you have to pay the face value through this installment. So some concepts we should be clear before any journal entries or any accounting procedures. So what are these concepts we are going to discuss while issuing the shares? There are two concepts, under subscription and over subscriptions. It is shown in the form of table. This is the difference also, the oversubscription and undersubscription. In oversubscription, applications are received more than the shares issued. It means if the company has issuing the 10,000 shares and the applications are received for 12,000, so this is called as oversubscription. If the company's goodwill is good, there is a high demand for the shares. So such condition is called as oversubscriptions. Under subscriptions, the applications are received less than the shares to be issued. So this is called as a undersubscriptions. Again, if the company's goodwill is not good, if the company is new in the market, there is no, it means the investors are not confident that whether should be invest or not, then such companies may face this situation under subscription. Condition. The condition of oversubscription arises when the company has a goodwill and very popular company, just I have told you. In case of undersubscriptions, if the company is new at initial stage, not there is a high goodwill in the market, etc. In oversubscriptions, pro rata allotment method has been generally are used. Next slide, we are going to discuss what is the pro rata allotment. Doesn't matter about the pro rata allotment in the case of undersubscriptions. In oversubscription, excess applications were not accepted for allotment, and definitely in undersubscriptions, all the applications are accepted for the allotment. Means all the applicants are issued the shares whatever they demand. Excess applications are rejected and monies are returned in case of oversubscriptions. In undersubscription, there is no matter or no questions of returning the money or not issuing the shares. So this is the difference you might have clear about what is oversubscription and undersubscription. The 5 points is there. So just I told that what is the pro rata allotment. First of all, you should be clear that pro rata allotment happens in case of oversubscriptions. We know that oversubscription is the application money received for more than a number of shares offered. So read carefully this statement. Under pro rata allotment, the excess application money received is adjusted. The word adjusted is most important. Adjusted against the amount due to allotment or calls. So surplus money after making adjustments against the future call is returned to the applicants. Here I will tell the one example. We know that we are issuing 10,000 shares and applications are received for 12,000. Then we cannot sanction the shares to all the applicants. We haven't such all the shares. So if any person is applying for 5 shares, he will be issued 3 shares. So in such a manner, such adjustments are done. So this is called as a pro rata allotment. So this happens only in case of or suppression of the shares. Another of the 2 concepts which we must know, because we are going to make the journal entries in case of calls in arrears and calls in advance. First of all, we should clear what is the calls in arrears and calls in advance. In previous slide, we discussed that payment of the calls on shares is the responsibility of the shareholders. If you are paying the installments for purchasing the shares, then paying the calls or paying the money on calls or shares is the responsibility of the shares, and a company have a right to demand on the calls on shares. We know. So here is the 2 concepts, calls in arrears and calls in advance. What is the calls in arrears? The amount remaining unpaid on allotment or on the calls is called as calls in arrears. Or we can say that it is the amount called up but not yet received by the company. This is the calls in arrears. It means if the shareholders has not paid the money in the form of installment or calls on shares, it is called as calls in arrears. Now what is the calls in advance? Calls in advance means the amount received by the company before calls are made. or we can say that it is the money paid by the shareholders to the company in advance, but not actually called by the company. Calls in advance, as the name indicates. In short, here how the journal entries are passed, we are going to discuss. In short, all the entries we are not going to discuss. In the next video we will discuss about this. So calls in advance, just we discussed the amount paid by the shareholders before the due date or calls becomes due. For receiving the calls in advance, entry will be passed to bank account debit to calls in advance account if the amount is received in advance. So this entry is passed. Bank account debit to calls in advance account. And if the calls in advance has to be adjusted with the call money due, then entry is passed. Calls in advance account debit to share call account for adjusting calls in advance. So in this manner the journal entry is passed. How the entry is passed in case of calls in arrears? Calls in arrears, just we understood that when the call money is yet to be received or not to be received or is in arrears, this is called as calls in arrear. Entry is passed in such a manner that calls in arrears account debit to share allotment account if the yet amount is not received, and to share calls account if any share call is not received, first installment, second installment, whatever may be. So entry is passed in this manner. Calls in arrears account debit to share allotment account to share calls account. Again there are entries, but we are not discussing. In the next videos we are going to discuss what are the entries are passed in case of calls in arrears. The next slides we are going to discuss what is the forfeiture of the shares. Just I told that company has right to get the entire amount of the shares from the investors. Company is raising the capital, company is issuing the shares, company want the capital. And we also know that every investors, every applicants is responsibility, or every shareholders is the responsibility to make the full payment of the shares. Whenever the application money are demanded, allotment money are demanded, first call, second call, and every time the investors or the shareholders have to pay the money. But sometimes it may happen that after giving again and again the notice, it may happen that some shareholders will not pay the calls on shares. So what should do? We should forfeit of such shares. So what is the forfeiture of shares? Forfeiture of shares means the cancellation of the shares. The shares are cancelled. What is the reason? Because of non-payments of calls due. If you are not paying the calls on shares, then your shares will be cancelled, and company has right. But the company can forfeit the shares only if the articles of association of the company allows the forfeiture. It means that company has no power unless or otherwise the articles of associations allow to them. If any shareholders is not able to pay the amount of call, unable to pay, company has sent the notice, warning letter again and again, then company has right to forfeit his shares on which he is unable to pay the amount of call. So this entire process is called as forfeiture of shares. So some questions might have in mind that what about the amount which is already paid by the shareholders? So company does not refund such amount to the defaulter shareholders, should be keep in mind. Company has right. And also your shares will be cancelled. Now you are not the shareholders of the company. You have not right to get the dividend of the shares. You are not right to attend the general meeting. You cannot vote even in the general meetings because your membership has been cancelled. So this is one type of the penalty given by the company to the shareholders because of the non-payments of the calls due. So how the entries are passed, because in the syllabus not only we must be clear that what is the forfeiture of shares, you have to pass the journal entries regarding the forfeiture of the shares. So entries is passed in such manner that share capital account debit called up money to share forfeiture account in bracket paid amount to share call account unpaid amount. So in this manner the entries are passed. Next, reissue of the shares. You might have questioned that after the forfeiture of shares, what should do the company? What should do about such shares which already forfeited by the company? You should know that you must be clear that such shares can be reissued by the company and the company has a right because this is the property of the company. So what is the reissue? Reissue of the forfeited shares. Shares are forfeited because only a part of the due amount of the such shares is received and the balance remains unpaid. On forfeiture, the membership of the original allottee is cancelled. We know, we have already discussed about this. He cannot to be asked to make the payments of the remaining amount. So such shares become the property of the company. Company has the right, whatever the company can do. Therefore, the company may sell the shares. Such sale of the shares is called as reissue of the shares. Company has the right to reissue of such shares. Thus, the reissue of shares means the issue of forfeited shares. So, company can issue at a reasonable time, at a reasonable price, whatever the company can do. There are some rules and regulations that also the company has to follow while reissuing such forfeited shares. In our syllabus, also we have to prepare how will be the journal entry or ledger posting in case of reissue of the forfeited shares. And again, I am telling to you that we are not going in detail about the journal entries passed entire regarding the issue of the shares or forfeiture of the shares. So this is the one entry which I am showing to you regarding the reissue of the shares. Bank account debit to share forfeiture account to share capital account. So in this manner the entries is passed. Next, at last, at the ending, we are going to discuss about what is the difference between forfeiture of shares and surrender of shares. It looks like the same, but actually there is a difference. So through these 4 points, I am going to discuss what is the difference between forfeiture and surrender. Forfeiture of shares, as we know that the cancellation of the shares due to the non-payment of the calls due, his membership has been cancelled, he will not get the dividend. Surrender means sometimes the shareholder surrenders his shares. Maybe the financial problem, he is unable to pay the installment of the shares. So here the shareholders take the initiatives, approach to the company and tell with the company that I am unable to pay the calls on shares and I am surrendering the shares. But there is a difference between the forfeiture of the shares and surrender of the shares. The first point is the return. No return is given when the shares are forfeited. Just I have told that if some of the amount has been already paid by the shareholders whose shares has been forfeited, then such amounts are not refunded by the company. So you should be clear. Here in case of surrender of shares, some return is given at the time of the surrender of the shares. There are some chances that you will get some amount of the money to the shareholders. So this is the major difference. But after the surrender, same will be happen that you are now the member of the, you are not now the member of the company, will not get the dividends, same in case of the forfeiture of shares, but some of the amount which already you have paid will be returned from the company. There are also rules and regulations you have to follow in case of forfeiture of shares. Forfeitures rules are mentioned in table A, and every company should be followed while forfeiting the shares. There are no rules are mentioned in the table A regarding the surrenders of the shares. A written information is given by the company for forfeiture of shares, and it is the responsibility of the company that it is necessary to inform such shareholders, defaulter shareholders, that your shares are going to be forfeited because you are unable to make the payments on calls on shares due. You are not paying any installments on calls on shares, so your shares are forfeited. In case of surrender of shares, there is no information is given regarding the surrender of shares. Here the initiatives of the respective shareholders himself approach the company and informs to the company that I am unable to make the payments on calls on shares and I am surrendering these shares. So it is not a matter of no questions about informing to the respective shareholders. Initiatives are taken by the shareholders in case of surrenders of shares, and initiatives are taken by the company in case of forfeiture of shares. And at last, regarding the rights, company has right to forfeiture of the shares. We know that the shares is the property of the company. Company has right to forfeiture such shares, cancel the membership. In case of surrender of shares, surrender is depend upon the will of the shareholders. So doesn't matter about the rights, it is depends upon the will of the shareholders. So we have discussed the important concepts regarding the issue of shares. The concepts was what is the equity share, preference shares, what is the difference between equity shares and preference shares, how the shares are issued at par, at premium, at discount, what are the steps of issuing the shares, what is the forfeiture of the shares, what is the reissue of the forfeiture of shares. So these concepts you might have cleared. In the next video we are going to discuss how the accounting procedures are regarding the issue of shares, how the journal entries are passed regarding the issue of shares. So thank you very much.